Life was passing me by. Desire to become big had become obsession, an unhappy obsession. I felt unhappy in my body, and being a slave to such a thing means being unable to live properly. It was constant, not because of other people's perceptions, but because of my own. I would feel the problem, just being introduced to someone. The person's eyes would creep over me and the question would be asked, "What sport do you do?" A bodybuilder should never be asked that question. That's what's so unique and so beautiful about it. And whilst I was not a bodybuilder, I was not alive. I first picked up the book Over the Edge by David Shaw back in 1997, devouring it in a single sitting. Books on bodybuilding weren't as readily available as they are today, and so this became a read I returned to many times. Some know it as bigorexia, exercise addiction, or being bitten by the iron bug. The medical community refers to it as muscle dysmorphia. In his book Muscle Confessions of an Unlikely Bodybuilder, Sam Fussell labelled it the disease. But whatever the designation, the pathology and the symptoms are the same. An unrelenting, illogical, obsessive passion for the iron, together with an ever-present dissatisfaction with never feeling quite big enough. David Shaw has it, and this is his story. Well, kind of. Shaw finds the iron as a young teen in the 70s when bodybuilding was still very much a misunderstood and socially rejected sport. In the then hypermasculine Australia, Aussie rules football, rugby, drinking, and pub brawls were the only culturally accepted male recreational activities. You lifted weights only as a means to facilitate these national pastimes. Ordered to put on weight because he was too light to make the running team, Shaw begins his love affair with the iron. Shaw's first contact with the iron provides an excellent window into the early days of modern bodybuilding before it turned mainstream and attracted the commercial interest which today undermines its humble, hardcore origins. Melbourne, Australia was a long way from Venice Beach, but its hardcore denizens were no less committed and are as equally eclectic and eccentric characters as their Southern California counterparts. Although initially ignored by the gym's veteran lifters, they soon form a bond, and Shaw and his brother, who serves as both David's training partner and comedic foil, are taken under their wing and mentored by many of the senior lifters. "I keep telling you," retorted Mark, "muscles ain't art. They're there to frighten the shit out of people. They're a representation. They prove a point. They're ugly, but they're not art." Shaw establishes very clear goals from the outset. He wants, or needs, to win the Mr. Universe at all costs, and his life revolves around achieving his dreams at the expense of anything that isn't connected with the gym and bodybuilding. Eventually outgrowing the small pond that is his local gym, Shaw sets out to learn the secrets of the pros in California, particularly their chemical ones. He meets some notable industry names along the way: Bev Francis, Victor Richards, the Barbarian Brothers, and the man himself, the great Arnold, who reveals his true character in a memorable scene. Prior to this meeting, the author attends the 1980 Mr. Olympia in a wonderful recount of that inauspicious contest. Mensa was given 5th. It didn't sink in for a moment, but there was bedlam. Everyone was screaming abuse. I'm not sure who they were directing their insults to, but I doubt that Mike Mensa heard them. He couldn't believe the ridiculous decision. King was frothing at the mouth. "5th? 5th? Fucking how could you put my man 5th? Fuck you, Arnold. Fuck you, Arnold. Fuck. He could not accept it. He would not accept it. Frankie sat back in his seat. Mensa retired on the spot. Boyko came forth. He went out backstage like an innocent man being led to the gallows. Then he threw a few chairs around and smashed a few lockers. Zane was lucky to come 3rd. He didn't think so. He smashed his trophy on the Opera House steps. Chris Dickerson took 2nd. Head down, he seemed to ask a question to someone, anyone, but he got an answer. Perhaps he was in shock. Perhaps he knew all along. Arnold won. I can't recall hearing the announcement. All you heard were chants of rigged, rigged, rigged. The video that was made of the competition cut the victor's speech short, simply because you couldn't hear it. I couldn't bring myself to boo the great man. I merely stood and observed. I wondered when I would meet him. I knew I would one day. I just didn't know what the circumstances would be. Shaw's and other pros' drug usage is explicitly detailed in both the type and the quantities used. Before PEDs became the taboo subject that they are, a range of anabolic pharmaceuticals could easily be sourced directly from Australian doctors willing to write the prescription. The doctor we found was Asian. He took no convincing and seemed to know a lot about the drugs, but he couldn't satisfactorily answer a single question. He mentioned as an afterthought that I would probably die in my early 30s. 2 coffins, said Mark. 1 for you, 1 for the trophy. The rest of the drugs needed were sourced black market or obtained from local veterinarians in the form of bladders, which provided bulk amounts of product at insanely low prices. After a few initial failed cycles, Shaw throws caution to the wind and goes all out. Shaw isn't conservative with his usage, and it's his over-the-edge approach that lends the title to the book. My peak weeks at this time were around 5,000 milligrams to 6,000 a week. My diary covers 6,000 milligrams a year, but I lost track of the orals. I was on a dozen steroids, and the drugs were always changing. Mark would pull out a 10ml bottle from the drawer, look briefly at the label, load up 5 mils into 2 syringes, and throw the bottle into the rubbish bin. Why not, he'd say. I could probably give you a couple of damn good reasons why not, but would you listen? Shaw finds himself responding superbly to his new drug regimen. You have bodybuilding genetics, David, said BJ the Mad Irishman. Never mind all this fast twitch, slow twitch shit. Never mind what's passed before. God put the receptors in your muscles, not in your hair follicles or subcutaneous glands, and he gave those receptors an affinity for steroids, he added. That's what pros mean when they say they have good genetics. Shaw's also very candid about the side effects of his protracted drug use, as well as those of his inner circles. With many of the negatives of PEDs downplayed in recent years, his recollection makes for a sobering tale of the Faustian bargain made for pushing the body to its superhuman limits. A lot of people believe steroids will only do these things to people who have a violent and aggressive streak inside them already. They'll only ignite what's there. I disagree. I've seen too much and done too much to know that steroids don't just affect certain minds, but can also affect a sane, balanced person. Animals given steroids when put in dangerous situations choose to fight rather than run. It wasn't just the drug use that was different on his trip to the US. It was many other things also. Shaw encounters a surreal underbelly that, although is common knowledge today, was hidden from the mainstream at the time and spoken of only in whispers among closed circles. Bodybuilders doing gay for pay, receiving hypnotism to induce workout hysteria, and the rampant politics that turned many contest outcomes into a foregone conclusion were all elements that disappointingly revealed the sport for what it truly was. Nothing was as it seemed, and no one was who they ever said they were. The most memorable was Lee Haney. I saw him with a group of the factory boys at Dallas Brooks Hall after he'd won his final Mr. Olympia, eclipsing Arnold's record. On paper, Haney was the greatest bodybuilder of all time. During his reign of supremacy though, he was rarely featured on the magazine covers. Can you believe that, he said? I'm 8 years as Mr. Olympia, and all because of the colour of my skin. He spoke a lot that afternoon, for instance, about how he hated lies. By the way, he said, did you know that I was the first natural Mr. Olympia? People once pursued bodybuilding to separate themselves from a culture and a society that they didn't feel a part of, and were perhaps ostracized to begin with. It's why the sport attracts so many misfits. There's a certain solace to be found in building a wall of muscle around oneself and cladding the lifter in protective muscular armour to keep the world at bay. Unlike today, where there's money to be made in many areas of the sport, people pursued a bodybuilding trajectory with equal parts love and hate, driven by a blend of unhealthy egotism and self-loathing. Despite the disparagement of today's scene by seasoned veterans from the earlier generation, it's interesting to note that guys like Shaw were equally disillusioned with the commercialized changes being wrought on the activity that was definitely transitioning to the mainstream. Bodybuilding wasn't a subculture reserved for men with iron in their veins anymore. It was a fad. It was commercialized. I'd been blissfully ignorant of the changes until I stepped on a plane to Los Angeles in the summer of 1990. When I would return to America in 1995, the process would have gone further. In 95, I walked from my hotel to the muscle pit, the outdoor gym at the beach. There wasn't a big man to be seen. When I got through the crowd of spectators' entrance gate, a man standing there put his hand up to block my way. "Top off, please," he said. "What? Could you take your top off, please?" "You want me to train half naked?" He nodded. "Get fucked," I said. I remember reading the extreme level contest diet that Sam Fussell recounted in his book and thought it to be an exaggeration. A similar diet outlined in Shaw's book is also recounted in the same level of dubious detail. Considering most enhanced pros don't dip below 3,000 to 4,000 calories in their contest prep, and they still complain about that, this particular detail set off my bullshit alarms. Considering Shaw was using all manner of pharmaceuticals including Clen, T3 and GH, it seems doubtful that such a Spartan approach was necessary given the 234 pounds he needed to sustain. Breakfast, 6 egg whites and a small bowl of oats. Mid-morning snack, 1 baked potato, 1 piece of fruit. Tuna and a small bowl of rice. Dinner, 1 chicken breast, pumpkin and broccoli. When I got within 8 days, my diet became completely restricted. Breakfast, 6 egg whites. Lunch, boiled chicken and vegetables. Dinner, 6 egg whites. I cut out salt and no tap water because of the sodium content. I cut out all carbohydrates except the amount I got from the veggies. After 2 more days, these went also. It was as if the cocaine and the various other drugs were the only things that were keeping me standing. So who is David Shaw exactly? Beyond conjecture and a few dated forums, no one seems to know. A Google search turns up nothing, and despite photographs included in the book with the author's face blurred out, it seems likely that this work represents a composite of identities, rather than a single writer operating under a pseudonym. Whether the stories are apocryphal or not doesn't really matter, as the anecdotes are wildly entertaining and display a high level of verisimilitude. Shaw doesn't write with the same level of flowery Cambridge-educated prose like Fussell, but his raw style is still a treat. Loaded with great quotes and hilarious dialogue, it's a memorable page-turner and a must-read for hardcore fans of the sport. You get an idea of the masochistic lengths some people will put themselves through to compete, and risk so much for the chance of little more than to gain an obscure title and a plastic trophy. Shaw's words, although over 20 years old, still make for sobering reflections in a sport which has turned its modern-day competitors into little more than suicide pilots. And in addition to this wonderfully entertaining read, just like Sam Fussell's work before him, you might just see your own story reflected on the page. Thanks for watching. This week YouTube decided to demonetize my channel and shadow ban its content, reducing a few thousand daily views to a bare trickle. If you would like to support my work, please consider a Patreon donation or a single one-off tip via the link in the description. Have you read Over the Edge? Let me know in the comments your thoughts below. And thanks again.